Alright, it's time to do predictions for UFC 212. This was supposed to be Ray Borg versus Demetrius Johnson. It is not anymore. It is now Valentina Shevchenko versus Amanda Nunes, which was supposed to be the co-headline. Ray Borg pulling out with a illness. They haven't specified which, but this probably means something to do with a weight cut gone slightly awry. Because we do know that Ray Borg has a history of weight cut problems. So we now have a main event that Dana White said we would never get again. So this card is basically the Dana White is full of BS meter because he said he would never headline a card with Amanda Nunes again. He is. He said he would never headline a card with Demetrius Johnson. He tried. And yeah, that's kind of Dana White in a nutshell. Just kind of on some related news, the UFC officially is no longer owned by the Fertittas in any level. They sold their remaining equity stake of apparently 5.2% away to WIMG, William Morris Group. So they're officially gone, although their first or second cousin Tillman Fertitta is buying the Houston Rockets for $2.2 billion, apparently. And kind of goes to the whole idea that Dana White constantly saying UFC is bigger than insert sports league is pretty false, because the entirety of the UFC is apparently worth about $5 billion with this most recent portion of the sale to the Fertittas. And you have $2.2 million for a relatively middling NBA franchise, which, although currently good, is not exactly one of their historical ones like the Chicago Bulls, the LA Lakers, Boston Celtics, Philadelphia 76ers. It's not in that ilk, and it went for 2.2. So there you go. About, UFC worth about 3 NBA basketball teams. Pretty hard to say that you're bigger than any sport when that is the case. So let's start at the bottom. We got Raging Cajun Johnson versus Adriano Martins. Johnson is coming off of 2 wins. Martins is coming off of a loss. That being said, I'm all in on Adriano Martins here. No part of Cajun Johnson's game is specifically amazing. He's a serviceable striker, a better than you would expect grappler, but not a particularly great one. Not positionally kind of unsound at times. Adriano Martins is a fantastic grappler who is a better than you would think striker, although kind of low output. I see this fight going largely Johnson ending up on the ground and getting tapped out by Adriano Martins at some point. So Adriano Martins by submission. Luis Enrique versus Arjun Bhullar. Have not actually seen Arjun Bhullar fight in the full contents. I've seen highlight videos. I've seen video packages of his fights, but I have not seen a complete fight, and that puts me at a loss as to what to really do here. He is a lifelong wrestler, and the stylistic matchup is not necessarily great for Luis Enrique, who has a significant problem when he's not able to just kind of bully you in the clinch. And presumably Bhullar will be reasonably strong there. That is kind of his ballpark. That being said, I've got to go with Luis Enrique based on just strength of competition. I mean, his wins over Dmitry Smolyakov and Christian Colombo are better than anything that Bhullar has faced. Additionally, on top of that, he's fought in the UFC now, I believe, 4 times, 2-2 record. Losses to Mycene Tybura and Francis Ngannou are not that bad to look at, especially the way Tybura has fought lately. I'm going to go with Luis Enrique. I'm going to say he submits him in the second round, but this is a bit of a weird one because he's fighting someone who I don't necessarily feel great about in the UFC. I don't feel that he's necessarily ready right now. That being said, he's a terrible stylistic matchup for Luis Enrique, so this could be a much more difficult fight than you would expect. Mitch Clark versus Alex White. I'm going with Mitch Clark to pick up a late submission. Mitch Clark is a very intelligent fighter. Knows a lot. His knowledge of craft is incredibly good. Doesn't have the physicality to keep up with that in any way. Alex White is like the far higher ceiling fighter. He's much more athletic, much better in that regard. It's just that if we look at Alex White's history to a degree here, it's when he has been faced with a guy with a deep array of grappling talents and takedown ability, he has lost. Tony Martin really is the only example he has, and Tony Martin had a very easy time with him. Granted, Martin is a far physically more impressive fighter than Mitch Clark. Mitch Clark is probably the least athletic guy in the weight class, but I just don't trust Alex White to necessarily have the combination of fight IQ, the combination of skills that will actually allow him to win this fight. Pretty decent stand-up guy, actually a pretty decent wrestler too, but I see him at some point ending up on the ground, and he sticks himself in some dangerous spots there. Gavin Tucker versus Rick Glen. I'm going with Gavin Tucker by decision. He's an interesting prospect with a lot of interesting stand-up ability, actually. He really looked better than I expected against Sam Sicilia. Rick Glen, I thought, lost to Felipe Nover, but I do understand the decision, I guess. Glen is a really tough guy. I think kind of on the low end of the physical spectrum, though. Very talented as well, though. Like, well-rounded, does some actually kind of unorthodox things. He's a difficult out, but the way Tucker handled Sam Sicilia, there's, as much as Glen is a more difficult task because he adjusts, he doesn't get hit with the same thing repetitively. That's kind of the thing with Sam Sicilia and Sick Jiu-Jitsu fighters just kind of in general, is they don't really adjust at any point to what's going on. But yeah, I can't really see Glen troubling him tremendous amounts with his offense. Sara Moras versus Ashlee EvansSmith. I don't really have any faith in Sara Moras when it comes down to it. I'm going to go with Ashlee EvansSmith to win a ugly clinch-heavy fight, really. That's what I'm going to go with. Sara McMann versus Kaplan Vera. Kaplan Vera has actually been better than I thought she would be when they signed her. She's passed a lot of tests with pretty good colors. I think I picked Fashholz against her, and I know I picked Ashlee EvansSmith against her, and she proved me wrong on both cases. Really good. But Sara McMann is really at the top of the division. Outside of the two women who are fighting for the title, she's probably the number 3 fighter in that division. Maybe Holly Holm, I guess, if she gets back on the winning track. But yeah, no, it's a tough one. I'm going to go with Sara McMann. I'm going to say it takes her to decision against Kaplan Vera, who's never been finished. Tough girl. Should be able to ride it out. Then a fight I'm really interested in, Jeremy Stephens versus Gilbert Melendez. Gilbert Melendez coming down to featherweight, a move that at various points in his career I thought would be a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea now. I think that at the age he's at, cutting that extra 10 pounds of weight could be a big detriment. Such a late weight class change could be a problem. He's also used to really having an ability to push a pace that lightweights generally can't stand, or when they can, they beat him. And that's going to be an ability that's probably lackluster at featherweight. He's probably going to have a harder time being that more chaotic, more frenzied fighter. On the bright side, Jeremy Stephens does present a guy who he might be able to do that to. A guy who relies a lot on power, has historically had some bad performances. The Renato Moicano fight specifically coming to mind is one that I thought he should easily be able to take, and he failed wholeheartedly to take it, even though it was a relatively boring fight and a lot of people didn't like it. I mean, it was a great example of how Moicano, with footwork and striking and understanding of range, could really take Jeremy Stephens just out of the fight. Been going back and forth in this one, and I probably will again before the fight even happens. We'll have to see, but I'm going to go with Jeremy Stephens by unanimous decision. I just don't trust Gilbert Melendez cutting to featherweight for the first time. Well, the first time since his Shudo days, this late in his career. I don't necessarily think it fixes the problems with Gilbert Melendez. I think his skill set is kind of more tooled to a past generation, and physically he's on the decline. And I don't think a change to featherweight is actually going to help either of those facts. Eli Latifi versus Tyson Pedro. I'm interested in this fight. Pedro is the more athletic of the two, better striker. Latifi is a very, very good wrestler. Can catch you in some interesting submissions, although they're largely power-based, which could be a problem. The fight seems kind of similar to that of the Gian Vellante fight, but Pedro is a much more mentally tough fighter, and one who is a little bit higher on fight IQ and definitely a better grappler than Vellante is. So that changes the aspects of the fight there. I'm going with Tyson Pedro by decision. I feel excuse me. I feel like he's a guy who really has a bright upside in this division. He looked really good against Paul Craig. Wasn't impressed with the Khalil Roundtree fight just because Khalil Roundtree is such a limited fighter, although a stellar athlete who himself is coming up now in the ranks. But I think the best case scenario here is Pedro wins, goes on to bigger and better things, and brings some brightness to the 205 division that is sorely lacking. I mean, I guess there is some. There's Volkan Oezdemir coming up with his improbable run. Misha Serkinov, if he can kind of rewrite his ship, is an interesting prospect. The aforementioned Khalil Roundtree, Tyson Pedro here, a couple other new guys who've come in and could be interesting, but the top of the division is real stale right now. The fact that we're talking largely about just rematches or Oezdemir fights for the title is kind of indicative of that. Henry Cejudo versus Wilson Hayes. I have no reason to pick Wilson Hayes. Wilson Hayes' problem is that while he is a good athlete, he's not an elite athlete, and at flyweight that's a big problem. A lot of his stuff is power-based, takedown-based. Henry Cejudo is an Olympic-level wrestler and athlete. Should be able to absolutely shut Hayes' game down at its source, take a decision if not a finish. Rafael dos Anjos versus Neil Magny. The only thing here is Magny's size going to be a problem for Dos Anjos, who's only in his second 170-pound fight? But the problem is, he fought Tarek Saffiedine. Tarek Saffiedine has a much better understanding of range than Neil Magny, it feels like anyways. And Dos Anjos was able to deal with the physical disadvantages pretty well. Magny lets himself be stalked down a lot, lets himself be pushed into a clinch a lot. I think he's also pretty susceptible to the heavy roundhouse kicks that Dos Anjos throws. So as much as the size is an intriguing problem, I just don't see Magny necessarily having the other components to his game to pick up the win here. Although, in fairness, my track record of picking Neil Magny fights has not been great. He's beaten some guys like Kelvin Gastelum and Hector Lombard that it felt like should have beat him. Also has lost to guys who felt like he should have beat, like Lorenz Larkin. So it's a tough one, but yeah, I'm going to go with RDA to pick up. Do I think he finishes him? You know what? I think he finishes. Let's go with a late tap out. Rafael dos Anjos submission. And then the main event. I've already broken this fight down, so I'm going to be really short and succinct about this. We saw these two girls fight once already. Nunes took rounds 1 and 2. Shevchenko took round 3. Nunes looked really gassed out. She has historical cardio problems. Not that she's necessarily not in shape, but that she throws so much into every punch trying to end the fight that she's always going to gas herself out. Like, you just can't make a gas tank big enough to handle 25 minutes of that. Shevchenko proved she could survive the early going. I think she will again, and I think she will pick up a decision. Valentina Shevchenko to win the title. She's gonna have to. I think she loses round 1 and 2, and then wins rounds 3, 4, and 5. I don't think she finishes Nunes because I think even gas Nunes is so much defensive responsible, despite having been finished on 3 separate occasions. That being said, despite the record, Shevchenko is not that much of a finisher against top-end talent, and she should go the distance here, I think. It's kind of weird to think that Shevchenko is back in a title is already been in like a title eliminator, honestly kind of 2 title eliminators, and now a title fight in what is just, I believe, just her 5th fight in the UFC. It's kind of amazing and speaks to the fact that the women's bantamweight division does not necessarily have the greatest depth in the world. So that's all for this fight card. Looking forward to some of it. Like Dos Anjos Magny is a very interesting fight. Stevens versus Melendez is very interesting. That being said, I don't feel it's a pay-per-view quality card, because I mean, sure, originally you had double title fight, but without that title fight, it really feels kind of shallow. You got a title fight on there. I mean, Dos Anjos, I guess with a win, is sort of in the title picture at 170, and Cejudo's kind of there at 125. But Latifi Pedro, not really a meaningful fight, and that's gonna be on the main card. Melendez versus Stevens is a pretty big gamble from you to ask me to pay for it. And then the undercard is largely lacking in anything that I'm supremely interested in. Big fan of Mitch Clark, so I'm going to be watching that fight intently. Gavin Tucker, Rick Glen has some appeal. That's about it, really, though. Like I'm going to enjoy the free parts of this card, but the parts you're asking me to pay for, I just don't want to. When it comes down to it, and I usually do, so that's a bit of a problem. Anyways, that's UFC 215. I think we need to start seeing some more stacked pay-per-views, but that's my only real problem. I don't actually mind the fight as a whole, or the card as a whole, and we'll enjoy parts of it. So that's all. Usual links down below to my Twitter, to my website, to my MMA Playground, and of course my picks. So I hope you enjoy your day, and I hope you enjoy the fights.